district, you know the Pope listens. Dynasty our religion, for the blokes missing. On all of these trades, on all of these plays, on all of these grades. By the end of the day, y'all getting played. So, what you gonna do next? Try to fill up that flex? Send the homie a text, that trash offer's the best. You try to make it complex, then they text you back. Now all of a sudden they don't make any sense. Broaden your horizons, boy. Dynasty's not for the Simons, boy. These trades not for consignment, boy. Respect your opponent, y'all some piranhas, boy. This my advice, from me to you. Open up your cute little podcast queue. Search up GOAT District, my dude. Pop it in your ear, man, y'all know what to do. It's the... And I always be traded. And I always be traded. And I always be trading. Y'all try to betray them, but first you gotta bait them. Fish.
All right, welcome everybody to the GOAT District. We are live, and we are missing our fearless leader. JD was unable to make it tonight, had some personal commitments he had to attend to, so the rest of us are going to handle it all on ourselves. So I feel like a grown-up big boy now.
Inmates are running the asylum tonight.
Yes, exactly. And we got to, of course, welcome Andrew, filling in on one of his many guest appearances, taking over for JD. So this should make for a fun show for sure. And Theo, why don't you just go ahead and introduce our guest today, and we'll get things firing up here for you.
Yes, so today we're excited to have Adam Harstad on the show. He produces some awesome content for football guys. He writes the Regression Alert column, which is a really good weekly column, as well as the Rent the Kicker article. He also has an awesome blog. If you go to his Twitter feed, which pretty much lists every article that he's written in the last few years, he has some tremendous Dynasty takes and some tremendous Dynasty data and strategy. And we're really excited to get a chance to talk to him. Playoffs are great. We had a historical weekend this past weekend in the NFL. In my opinion, it was the best set of games that I've ever seen in the playoffs. But we have an eye on the Dynasty, rookie drafts coming up and just improving our Dynasty teams. That's right around the corner. And we're happy to get a chance to talk to Adam. So welcome to the GOAT District, Adam.
Sorry, navigating the mute. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure. As Toronto Dave has already said in the chat, this is pretty exciting for us. Worth 1,000 guests, according to Toronto Dave. I think that's pretty close. I might have to check the conversion rate on that. And he also says Adam is your favorite analyst, and I think that's mostly true. So we're pleased to have you on, Adam. And basically what we're going to do today is just kind of talk our way through Dynasty. We're kind of right between seasons with 2011 in the rearview mirror and just getting started on 2012. And, so this is a time I definitely like to just kind of step back and take a little bit of a larger view of the whole landscape and, see what's going on. So, Adam, what are the things that you tend to like to do at this time of year, dynasty wise, as far as like your teams, your analysis, just kind of give us a little glimpse into the kinds of things you like to do.
Yeah, everybody says dynasty, there is no off season. But I usually just like to step away for a bit. The leagues that I'm in typically aren't that active during the winter, and I'm kind of okay with that. It's kind of nice to have a chance to kind of step away and then come back to the team with fresh eyes. But it's good for me to, I'll start some new projects, stuff that is kind of a bigger time commitment that I'm able to get into during the season. But I kind of been meaning to play around with. So I'm really looking forward to that, to having a couple months to just kind of tinker with stuff and see if I discover anything useful or anything useless or just anything in between.
Follow-up question in terms of your activities around this time. What happens first? You start to dive into these new projects, or the Christmas tree comes down?
Actually, oh yeah, you can see it in the background right there. We took the ornaments off last weekend, which was a big thing because my 5-year-old son has been absolutely resistant to the idea that Christmas is over.
Yeah.
And we have a Google Mini, and he'll ask, how many days until Christmas? Every day he asks how many days until Christmas. And then he's like, no, you can't take it down. Christmas is in 330 days. So we're doing it a little bit at a time. We got the ornaments off this weekend. It was a struggle, but eventually we're okay with that. And then I think maybe next week we might try the tree again and see how that goes.
I love it. Very festive. And I love the idea. It's all year Christmas, except for outside decorations. And you get a letter from your HOA. They don't like that as much.
Right. That's a good point. So I'm curious, Adam, when you say, you just kind of like to dive into some larger projects, I kind of get the sense that you dive in with not necessarily knowing exactly where you're going or what you're going to find a lot of the time. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, for sure. I feel like if you go in with too many preconceived notions, if you believe something and you start looking at the data, you're going to find data that agrees with you. And it's maybe not necessarily the best data. I wouldn't advocate going in completely blind. It's good to kind of have an idea of the kind of questions you want to ask, or to just have a theory that, like, I think things might work this way and I kind of want to investigate that more. But I think it's important to approach it more. I think things might work this way and I want to investigate, and less, I think things might work this way and I want to prove it.
Okay. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. One of the things that I was taking a look at when I was kind of trolling through your feed a little bit earlier this week, we were looking at the age curves for different. I shouldn't say curves necessarily, but the ages of different positions and how they varied over time. And one of the things I noticed, and I'm going to throw that tweet up here in just a second, is from 2011 to 2016, the average age of the top 36 running backs never dropped below 25.8 years old. And then that was largely due to a cohort of running backs that kind of aged gracefully into their second contracts. Do you think we're heading that way again, fueled by the running backs from like the 2016 through 2018 draft classes, Dalvin Cook, McCaffrey, Kamara, all those kind of guys? How do you feel about that?
Well, yeah, actually, I kind of think it's almost even the opposite. It's less, I think the average age of a position is less about how the guys are aging and more about who's coming in. Because if you look at the incoming running back talent, 2008 was an amazing class, one of the best of all time. And then 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, pretty much no one of note was coming in. You got Le'Veon Bell in 2013, LaShawn McCoy in 2009, 9 or 11, or somewhere in there. You got a couple guys, but for the most part, they were just bad classes. And so when it came time for the young guys to kind of take over, there just weren't any young guys to take over. And so teams kept turning back to these boring, mediocre veterans because there were no good young guys to replace them. And the position just kept getting a little bit older, a little bit older, a little bit older. And then 2016 and especially 2017, you had these bananas good draft classes, and all of a sudden the age of the position dropped like a stone. And that, like, the 2017 running back class, and I don't say this lightly, is the best running back class in NFL history. And it just, you pulled up the age chart and you can see, like, it immediately hits and the age of the position just sinks like a stone. Now I think those are really talented running backs. I think they're going to age like most really talented running backs do, which is, better than people think. And we're probably going to see the age of the position creep up a bit over time, but all it will take is one or two really good draft classes again to drop it back down.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense. Andrew, anywhere you want to go off of?
I think since we have the age chart up, let's just move one column to the right, so the wide receivers. And again, it looks like we're getting, darker red as we move through like the time. What's your, like, how do you attribute like is that due to like the second, third year breakouts? Is that just due to the, like a similar, fact pattern of just the stud wide receivers are coming through these latest classes? What are you attributing to the wide receiver boom, or is it maybe more of the passing fueled NFL?
Yeah, I think it's mostly talent. And I really like this chart. This stems from something I wrote in 2013, where I was looking around the landscape and saying, like, wow, running backs are really old. Like this feels unusually old. And I ran the numbers and I found that, I mean, you can look on the chart right there. In 2013, average age of the top 36 running backs was 26.4. At no point before or since then, in the last decade and a half, has it been higher than 26.0. And I was thinking about that. I'm like, why is that? I think a lot of people see these shifts and these changes, and they think it's some sort of structural trend. Like, oh, players are playing longer. That was a common one. Modern medicine, players are playing longer. And I was looking at it more, and I'm like, well, it's not really that. It's that nobody's coming in, like nobody good, nobody worthwhile. And so my hypothesis, or that was my hypothesis, is that it's due to incoming talent. And so I said, as soon as we start getting some good draft classes, I'd imagine that this will sink like a stone. And then I've been following it up over the years, and it's been kind of fun to see that that hypothesis, I think, has withstood the passage of time and the accrual of evidence. So I tend to think the same thing at the wide receivers right now. We've just had some really, really strong and underrated wide receiver classes over the last 3 or 4 years. And I think people have gotten spoiled in rookie drafts with just how good these last 3 or 4 classes have been. And they're starting to think that this is the new status quo. You're seeing rookie draft pick prices rise because people are expecting more. I mean, I know this class is perceived as bad, but in general, I think rookie picks used to be cheaper a decade ago because the classes were bad and people were used to the classes being bad. And now they're more expensive because the classes are good and people are used to the classes being good. I saw Trump Dave asked if it was coaches' willingness to play young wide receivers more. And that's, I don't think that's necessarily the case. There's some of that, and I think there's some maybe a little bit of college players being more ready to make the transition to the NFL, especially as the NFL is adopting a lot more college scheme concepts. But mostly, whenever I see a trend like this, my first thought is that it's probably 90% just fluctuations in talent and maybe 10% actual underlying structural changes.
Got it. And have you, and I don't know if you've seen this in the data, so happy to move on if you haven't. Is there anything to the age cliffs that we're seeing? Is there just like a sudden drop off such that just like add like a Gabe Davis, which I know we want to touch on earlier, 22 years old, he's able to quickly bring that number down. I know he didn't here, but like he would be somebody who could quickly bring that number down, or maybe use Jamar Chase as a better example. And like immediately there's like somebody who is like to 27, 28 years old, who's like dropping off of a cliff such that is that impacting the data at all? Is it just like the younger and younger wide receivers, or are we seeing age cliff in here as well?
Well, I'm glad you brought this up. So one of my favorite offseason projects that I did in 2015 is I kind of had this niggling feeling that the way that we were thinking of aging and the way we were modeling aging in Dynasty just wasn't really matching how players actually aged. And we usually use those age curves. I'm sure you've all seen them, that, a player enters and then they ascend and then they reach their peak and then they kind of decline as they age and then they're out of the NFL. And if you average production by age, it will produce an age curve. It's one of the simplest exercises. Anybody can reproduce it. But if you look at individual players, it's almost never a curve-shaped career, right? It's never like this slow ascent, this peak, this slow descent. Instead, what happens is there's a very rapid ascent, and then they pretty much just putter along at about the same level, plus or minus a little bit. They have up years, they have down years, but they're kind of fluctuating around a fixed mean. And then there's a very rapid descent. You think about like Randy Moss was a top 12 wide receiver one year, and then he was like cut and traded twice the next year. It's just in the blink of an eye, you're done. And so from that, I created my own age model that builds on mortality tables like life insurers use, where instead of saying, you know, you're going to have a slow ascent and a slow decline, I'm basically modeling risk and saying wide receivers at this age, historically, there's like a 28% chance that they're just going to be done. And we're not going to see it coming. There's usually not. I found that actually wide receivers tended to score more points in their last fantasy viable year than they did in their second to last fantasy viable year. So not only were they not descending, they were actually ascending, and then they'd hit a cliff and they were gone forever. So there's usually very little warning. What?
They burned bright right before blowing up. Yeah. Right.
I mean, there's just it just highlights how little warning you receive because they're great and it seems like they're getting better and then they're done. So the age cliff phenomenon is a very real phenomenon where you have these old mainstays who you've been relying on year after year, and all of a sudden they're gone. But it's not really a new phenomenon. Right. I mean, yeah, you look at Randy Moss, you look at Marvin Harrison, even the great wide receivers of 20 years ago, it was still that steady state prime, and then all of a sudden they're done.
Could that be on?
Oh, yeah. Well, I was going to say tangential and nothing to do with Dan's best ball. Where does DeAndre Hopkins look? Or are you not worried because he had a terrible year last year, so he's not on that ascension curve? Sorry, Dan. It's totally fine.
I always say that fantasy football, it's not about getting all the calls right. It's the guy who wins in fantasy football is the one who does the best job of pricing risk and reward. And DeAndre Hopkins, it's very much within his range of outcomes. We've seen a lot of wide receivers like DeAndre Hopkins who have a down year and they rebound and they're fine and they play for forever. Look, you know, his former running mate in Arizona, Larry Fitzgerald, had like 3 or 4 down years and everybody thought he was done. And he went on to have the second most receptions in NFL history, played until he was 37 or 38. At a high level even, you know, he was a top 12 wide receiver at 34 or 35. That's within the range of possibilities for DeAndre Hopkins. But given the risk, I mean, also within the range of possibilities for DeAndre Hopkins is that he has hit that cliff and he's done. And given the risk and reward profile, I am not a buyer of DeAndre Hopkins, which doesn't mean that I think he's necessarily going to be bad. I just don't think it's worth it at the price right now.
No, it's awesome. Thanks for entertaining that question. Dan was running pretty high on his good fourth round pick in a best ball draft, so I had to knock him down.
If he was in the 4th round,
yeah, I appreciate that. That was awesome. That was great. Check in the mail.
Just curious. In regards to the tight end position, where we're seeing a very like an older group of tight ends, plus Kyle Pitts and Mark Andrews, kind of at the top. You know, for a lot of redrafts and still up there in Dynasty. Is there an age you start worrying about tight ends, or is that a position kind of all to itself?
Tight ends they're definitely the position I feel least confident about because I'm looking at historical aging patterns. And the problem with tight ends is historical tight ends are not like tight ends today. The position is legitimately different. Like Steve Jordan was a top 5 tight end for like 8 straight years. And he's in the Minnesota Vikings Ring of Honor. He was a multiple Pro Bowler. And if you look at his numbers, it's like Scott Chandler, right? He'd be tight end 15 this year. And he was like the dude in Minnesota just because tight ends were not really used as receivers. Even the good receivers were more blocker than receiver. And how Steve Jordan aged, I don't know how much that tells us about how we should expect Travis Kelce to age, because it's a very different position. He's being used more like a wide receiver. So kind of what I've done at the tight end position is I created 2 models. One of them is, look, historically, this is how tight ends have aged. And then the other one is, all right, if we assume that a tight end is halfway between an old school tight end and a modern wide receiver, and we just kind of average the 2 positions together. We dump everybody together. You know, this is kind of how that amalgam tight end wide receiver position aged, it's very hacky. Like, I haven't tested the data. I don't really have a strong analytical justification for that. That's very much, like, here's a hole, here's a leak. I'm just going to slap a stick of flex tape on it and kind of hope it holds sort of approach, which is very much in character with how I do these kind of things. So I've been betting against Travis Kelce for a couple years now. And it hasn't really paid off. I mean, I'm not betting against him. My data says there's maybe like a 30% chance every year that he's just completely done, which means there's a 70% chance that he's not completely done. So every year that he's not completely done, it's not like he's proving me wrong. I'm just saying with a 30% bust risk, I don't think he's worth the price. And he hasn't really paid off on that yet. But then again, I can point to Julio Jones, who's basically the exact same age. I think he's 6 months older, and he's looking very much not like a high-end fantasy asset. And so, I mean, I think a lot of it's just luck that it could have been Kelce who fell off and Jones who sustained, but instead it was Jones who sustained or Jones who fell off and Kelce who sustained. So yeah, I don't really have a great feel for the tight end position. The difference makers are old, and there's not a whole lot you can do about that. If you want a difference maker at the position, you either bite the bullet and pay a huge premium for Andrews or Pitts, or you kind of take a risk with Kelce, Kittle, and Waller, or you accept, you take a shot at a younger guy like maybe Hawkinson or Knox, and you accept that you're probably at a noticeable performance disadvantage, at least in the short term.
Right. That makes sense. And I mean, and the thing is, even though you're betting against Kelce, I mean, you're not really betting against him. You're just choosing to place a bet on a different player instead. Right. And, so, you can handle Kelce succeeding as long as, who you took instead of him is also a success.
Well, and that's the thing too, is the pivot from Kelce for me was Andrews. So, he's managed to maintain, but I'm still feeling pretty good with where I was at instead.
Right. Exactly. And we all kind of have our own, spots where we feel like it's time to start placing that bet a different way than what we were before. As far as running backs go, as long as we're on this, did you look at them? Do they have kind of the same characteristics as the wide receivers, where they tend to go strong and then all of a sudden the bottom drops out? I'm assuming that's pretty much the case.
To some extent, they did show signs of decline a bit more than wide receiver. I was mentioning earlier that wide receivers were historically better in their last year than they were in their second to last year. That was not true for running backs. They were historically better in their second to last year. So there was some decline there. There were a lot of sudden fall-offs and a lot of telegraphed fall-offs. So at running back especially, I'm much more likely to be concerned about a moderate decline in performance. If a guy plays 20% worse, maybe it's nothing. Like, maybe that's just typical fluctuation around the prime performance level, because that's totally normal, plus or minus 20%. That's just a regular year-to-year variation. But also, a lot of times that's what the end looks like. So my palms start to get a little bit sweaty if I've got, an older running back who's not quite what he was the year before.
Okay. So where are you at on Zeke then? Just for example, do you feel like he's at the end, or was that really injury related this year and you feel like he's going to bounce back?
I would be very nervous about him. I'm a buyer on everybody at the price. I actually just clicked over to keep trade. I'm looking what his price currently is, because he's talented, and talent is the great confounder. Talented players play longer. They're more likely to bounce back from down years. They're more likely to whatever the good outcome is. talent makes you more likely to hit it. Yeah, he's running back 24 on keep trade cut. I would probably be buying at that price. I mean, you look at, there's other running backs ahead of him who I think also have kind of a shaky profile. And I'd probably prefer to bet on Elliott. You know that there's the potential for huge payout. You know, there's kind of a little bit of the chance for a backdoor cover where maybe he's not that great anymore, but he still gets a huge workload because he's Zeke, and Jerry Jones loves him. I don't think he's a high-end dynasty asset anymore, but he's not really being valued as such. So there's less risk in taking a shot.
Just to follow up on Dan's question, where would you be at on two guys who the fantasy football community is a lot higher on than Zeke, I'd say at this point? Alvin Kamara and Dalvin Cook will both be 27 when the season starts. Do you start having any reservations about those two?
No, but I'd rather have Austin Eckler at a discount. And that's kind of been one of my things this year, that they're basically the same age. I think it's a 3-month span from youngest to oldest between those three. They've basically scored the same over the last 3 years now. They all came from the same 2017 draft class. They're all on a big second contract. Profile-wise, it's really, really hard to distinguish between the three of them. I think Eckler is actually the one going the highest in early 2022 drafts. So profile-wise, it's really hard to distinguish between the three. But Eckler is consistently going, on the market. He's just consistently cheaper. And I don't really know why. I don't know if it's still just lingering because of the draft capital, because he was the undrafted free agent. But we've just seen so much since then. I'm not really a buyer on, although I say that, and now I'm looking at keep trade cut, and it actually looks like Eckler's going way higher than those three now. I view those three as all pretty interchangeable in terms of the profile, in terms of the risk and the reward. So I like whoever's cheapest. I'm not super worried about the age because there's not a whole lot of comparable high-end difference makers who are all that much younger right now. Jonathan Taylor, but you're not getting Jonathan Taylor. So I'd be comfortable betting on one or even more of them at a decent, reasonable price. And if they go bust, they go bust. Sometimes you make a bet and you go to zero. If they last another 3 years, then you just made a huge profit.
Makes sense. All right. Guys, anything else off this graph that you want to hit on before we move on?
No, I love.
No, I think
awesome.
it's fantastic information for sure.
All right, sounds good. Theo, where do you want to go next? You got a question lined up?
Yeah, sure. Do you tend to hoard picks, or do you like to trade them for proven assets? Or is it something that year to year when you evaluate draft classes?
I tend to acquire a lot of picks over time just because they're such a good currency. And basically, I've come around to this new paradigm over the last year that there's basically 5 positions on your team. You got quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and prospect. And prospect is its own position. Quarterback's job is to put points in your quarterback spot. Running back puts points in your running back spot. Wide receiver in your wide receiver spot. Tight end in your tight end spot. Prospect's only job is to hold or gain value. It's one job. And because of that, picks are the best prospects because they basically never lose value. Even if a college player gets injured, okay, you can take someone else with that pick. They're very insulated from injury, suspension. They follow predictable patterns. You know that everybody in the league wants them. They're universally desirable. Whereas if you have Derrick Henry, some teams in your league are just not going to be looking to buy a 28-year-old running back. Your market of potential buyers is much smaller. So I really like to acquire picks. Also, it gives you roster flexibility because they don't take up a roster spot. So I went through a stretch in my home league where I think there were 8 consecutive years where at one point or another I held 4 first round picks in every class. And that's a 10 team league. So I usually had like 40 to 50% of the rookie class at any given point. And then I usually traded them off later for other players. I probably made maybe a third of those picks. And it's usually on a case-by-case basis. If somebody's giving me more than I think the pick's worth, I'll sell it. If nobody's giving me more than the pick is worth, I'll use it. It's kind of come to an end recently. I think just because the league's seen me do it for so long that they've kind of wised up. Early on, I was doing the thing where I trade for a guy's pick next year. And the next year he's on the clock, and he would be on the clock, but he doesn't have a pick, and he's so desperate to get back in the draft that he'll trade for his own pick back and give me his next year's pick and a little bit extra. And then we get to that next year, and he'd be on the clock, and he doesn't have a draft pick, and that well's kind of run dry. Because we've had so many good draft classes recently, I find picks are harder to come by. There's more competitors trying to buy. So recently I hadn't been stockpiling as much. Although I did a big rebuild last year, and I wound up getting a ton in that league too. It's really just on a case-by-case basis. I try not to let myself be pigeonholed as, this is the guy who's going to chase youth. This is the guy who's going to chase upside. This is the guy who's going to chase whatever. I try to be really flexible. I don't fall in love with specific players for the most part, except for Rob Gronkowski. I really just try to go where I think the value is. And that changes a lot over time, because I think a lot of people are chasing last year's value.
So I think that, to give you a compliment and to put myself down, I mean, that's a real mental alpha move. I don't think I can operate my life like that, because get so emotional and so excited to make a pick. So I'm the guy in your home league who's like, I got to keep mortgaging my future to get back into the draft. So if you don't mind, like, and maybe Dan and Theo and the listeners obviously know, but what's your like? Are you just a more of a mental alpha than me? Is your background in like psychology, like cold hard statistics? Like what gives you that like confidence to know that this is a long-term value add strategy? Because like I said, who knows? I can hear it all day. Who knows if I can ever employ it just because of my nature?
I think a lot of it is I track my failures very religiously, and I revisit them a lot. I mean, I have a thread on Twitter that like, hey, I just won a title this year. Here, looking back, are the worst trades I made over the last 10 years. And there's, like terrible, awful, brutal, horrible trades where you see that and you're like, wow, that probably set your franchise back for, half a decade. And then I look at the results and I'm like, no, I was fine. I have equally good trades to offset that. That's just how it goes. And it's really good to remind myself that I'm playing a 60-40 game at best. I think I have an edge, but it's not a huge edge. I'm going to be wrong at least 40% of the time, sometimes just horrifically wrong. But as long as I'm right 60% of the time, and as long as I keep operating at a high enough volume, the edges will accumulate over time, and I'm going to have a lot of long-term success. And I can look back and I track and I see I have had this long-term success. So it's kind of a trust the process sort of thing. I have tricks because it's not easy for me either. There's loss aversion, which is we're twice as scared of losses as we are, desirous of gains. And I'm just as prone as anybody to loss aversion. One trick that helps is to imagine like your future self as a distinct entity and say like, future self, me in 2023 is sitting around and the rookie draft is rolling around. How is he going to feel that me today left him this bounty, right? He's going to be sad that, he lost out on whoever I traded away 2 years ago, but how's he going to feel in that moment? And so I try to be really kind to my future self. I don't want my future self, hating my past self for being so short-sighted and greedy. My future self regards my past self as very generous.
That's a wonderful way to live, Adam. My future self is always hating what I'm doing in my.
Until you recognize the pattern, you can't change it. Absolutely. No.
I love. Thank you for going on that tangent, because I love hearing that of, like I said, like it's in my nature to be a little bit more emotional. I agree that sometimes I can look back on that, but I like hearing that you're able to have these nice tips, tricks that help convince yourself and move away from that behavioral finance concept of the loss aversion. So I love that.
And another one too is I try to do rules as much as possible. That like an individual trade might be hard, so I try to set out rules. Like one of them is, and I never really had a name for it. One of my followers suggested last year, flexes for first. And the deal is like, I'll trade any of my flexes for anybody's firsts. And it's hard in the moment because you're like, heck no, I'm starting my flex. This guy is putting points in my lineup. I'm literally taking points out of my lineup right now. Why would I do that? But if you look at in the long run, flexes, guys who are like your running back 3 or your wide receiver 4, their value is very ephemeral. And most of the time it goes to 0 far faster than we would think. Whereas that first, again, is just such a safe store of value. It's just rock solid. And even if you're wrong, and even if the flex winds up being something, the first is going to be something too. You could probably trade that first for a different flex later on. So,
no, I love it. Awesome.
I think loss aversion is a great term and a great concept in fantasy football that you rarely hear. We hear about like being risk averse, but that's a very interesting way of looking at things, especially with Dynasty.
Yeah, Andrew, I think we need to have you laying down on a couch and referring to Adam as Dr. Harstead for the rest of the podcast.
If you sell a self-help book, I'm buying, baby. You pump me for all the money in the world.
There you go. You've got a new career just right there for you, Adam. That's perfect. And that kind of leads us into one of our other questions. How you feel about intentionally consolidating lesser players into studs through trades and having most of your roster's point scoring tied up into a few players. Is that a feature or a bug? What's your philosophy there?
Philosophically, it's good. It's better to have more of your value. I mean, so you imagine you have 2 wide receivers, and you could either have 2 guys who both scored 15 points per game, or you could have a guy that scored 20 points per game and a guy who scored 10 points per game. And imagine that 10 points per game that's like the waiver wire replacement limit, that you could just grab a guy off waivers right now and the expectation would be about 10 points per game. So you could either have like 2 solid starters, or you could have basically a stud and waiver fodder. A lot of people would prefer the 2 solid starters. They say the big reason is that one injury won't wreck their team. But the flip side to that is if you get an injury, it's twice as likely to be a guy that you care about. Because the guy with a 20 point per game receiver and a 10 point per game receiver, if his 10 point per game receiver gets hurt, who cares? That's waiver fodder. You just get another wide receiver. So when you have your value spread around more, individual injuries are less likely to be impactful, or when it's spread around more, they're going to be less impactful, but they're more likely to be meaningful. Whereas when it's concentrated, it's like Battleship. The little ship is the hardest one to sink just because you can't find the sucker. And if you do get an injury to your big star, that might devastate your team, but the result is a higher draft pick. So that's not a bad consolation prize. Like, it's better to be, if I have a strategy that I said, you're going to flip a coin and you're either going to finish first or you're going to finish 12th. That's the optimal strategy. Because if you finish 12th, okay, well, now you get the number 1 pick. You get a Jamar Chase or a Najee Harris or a Kyle Pitts as a consolation prize. The worst place to be is just 4th place over and over and over and over again, and not quite good enough to win it and not quite bad enough to get the help you need to get over that hump. So from that perspective, it's better to have your roster value concentrated. It's a higher variance strategy, but fantasy football is a high variance game. And then the other thing that a lot of people don't think about is if you have 2 15-point receivers, it's hard to improve. You can get a 16-point receiver off of waivers, which is like one of the best waiver pickups of the year, and your team got 1 point per game better. Whereas the 20 and 10 guy, if he gets a 16-point receiver off of waivers, his team just got 6 points a game better. People look at terrible starters as a liability, but the reality is that they're an opportunity, because it's never easier to improve your team than when you've just got this glaring hole. Like, you can do that basically for free. For minimal investment, you can make your team better.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And, and occasionally, sometimes you're picking up a guy off the waiver wire just for a spot start, a week or two, and, they can end up blowing up for you. Like I had a team that had just injuries like crazy right as we headed into the playoffs, and I had to pick up Braxton Berrios and throw him in the lineup, desperation move. And, he got me like 20, 25 points 2 weeks in a row. It's just fantastic. I mean, that's obviously the ideal outcome, which you're not going to see that often, but the point is you kind of leave yourself open to that, especially if the starters that you lost, and, in some cases I lost starters that were better than, I lost some of my top end starters, but still you can, if you have enough, enough of those top end starters left where you can kind of, you got still maybe 3 studs left to hold your team together, and the rest are maybe waiver wire guys or bench guys that you normally wouldn't start. The variance can sometimes pull you into winning anyway.
Yeah, people underestimate just how high variance fantasy football is. I had a team in one of my leagues. I've gone through my dynasty history, and I've ranked every team in every league I've done based on how many points they scored relative to league average, right? And so and I look, if you are one of the 99th percentile teams I've ever seen, what are the chances that you won a title? If you're a 90th percentile team, what are the chances you won a title? If you're a 60th percentile team, what are the chances you won a title? And I saw a team win a title with a 14th percentile team. That's 14th percentile. They were the second lowest scoring team in the entire league during the regular season, maybe the lowest. Very low scoring team. Huge schedule luck. They were 6-7, got into the playoffs as a number 6 seed, and they had, no joke, the most dominant playoff run of any team in any playoff in any league I have ever been in. They finished second, first, and first in the 3 playoff weeks. Just because fantasy's like that sometimes, right? You have a terrible team. You're starting Darius Hayward-Bay on a weekly basis, and he's like the number 60 wide receiver in the league. And then the playoffs come around, and over a 3-week span, he's wide receiver 8. And you win a title.
Yep.
People, and I see this a lot with win now trades, people kind of overrate the certainty of production. You saw it a lot. The 2, I think, most popular win now targets this year were Cordero Patterson and Leonard Fournette. And Fournette got hurt 1 game into the playoffs, and Patterson laid an egg during the playoffs, and neither of them helped you win now. I'm sure there are a lot of teams who lost titles because they traded for Patterson or Fournette, whereas if they had just stuck with who they had, they would have won the title. I'm sure there are multiple teams out there that happened to.
Yeah, definitely.
I traded for a little bit of Leonard Fournette in Dynasty this year. It did not work out as I planned.
I like the play still because Fournette was being priced as if the only value he gave you was in 2021, and he had no value beyond the year. And I never thought that was right. He's got future value too. He's a former top 10 draft pick. He's got all these good seasons in the past. He's playing pretty well. He'll probably be something this year. I think in the early best ball drafts, he's going running back 16, 17, 18. And I'm like, I don't think buying Fournette is necessarily a win now move, because even if he doesn't help you this year, even for a rebuilding team, he's got value beyond this year that I don't think is being priced in and accounted for. So I had a Fournette too. I'm not really that bummed out about him getting hurt. I think there's a good chance that he's going to be drafted pretty high heading into next year still.
Yeah, I think he'll be a running back too again. So it's not the worst, but would have been nice to see a bunch of cash from making that trade.
Yeah.
Yep, for sure. I guess kind of a corollary to that, then the year-to-year consistency in scoring for an entire dynasty team. Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? How do you feel about yearly consistency or weekly consistency?
To some extent, I think when people talk about consistency, they are not actually talking about consistency. Mm-hmm. A lot of people, I think, use the phrase consistency as a proxy for like being good. Like if there's a team in your league that scored 150 points 12 times in the season, you'd say, oh, that was a very consistent team because look, he was over 150 points 12 times in the season. No, that was a very good team. Like he scored a ton of points. But if you looked at like his weekly standard deviation, is that lower than anybody else's? People don't really know. You see that a lot for players. Oh, a consistent player is somebody who scores, who tops 10 points in 14 games. That's not consistency. That's being good. If you top 10 points in 14 games, you're at least a 140-point receiver, right? Likely much higher than that because people don't get exactly 10 points. Likely you're like a 220-point receiver. You're a good receiver. You're not a consistent receiver. And if you look at actual standard deviations, I don't know that they're especially meaningful. If anything, better players tend to have higher standard deviations just because that's how standard deviation worked. If you changed your scoring system so that everything was worth twice as many points, everything would score twice as much and everything would have twice as big of a standard deviation. Like bigger numbers lead to bigger standard deviations. There's ways to account for that, but I get the sense that most people don't care about coefficient of variance or standard deviation or any of that. They just want a guy who's going to score a lot of points a lot of weeks. If you look at, I haven't looked in a rigorous way at weekly consistency in teams. I have tested the predictive power of total points versus all play, which theoretically all play record would tend to reward more consistent teams. Total points would tend to reward higher variance teams. And it's about the same, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Both mostly in terms of predicting how you'll do next year. I don't think consistent teams in 1 year tend to do better the next year than inconsistent teams because it's mostly just random chance. It's not really predictable. It's good to be consistent from year to year if you're good. It's bad to be consistent from year to year if you're bad. If you're kind of in the middle, maybe you want to be inconsistent. But yeah, the worst thing is consistent and bad. That's what you definitely want to avoid.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the thing I was shooting at there is if you're in the middle, get good or get bad, but do something. Totally. I did a rebuild last year and it was my first, I've been doing Dynasty since 2007. And this was the first time I did a full on strip to studs rebuild. Between September of 2020 and October of 2021, I turned over my entire roster except for 2 players. There's only 2 players in common over that. And I wrote it up on my blog and I was very explicit up front that, look, my goal right now is to get bad. Football Guys has me rated as like the 6th best team in this league, and that's no good. I want to be 12th best team in this league. And I'm not going to tank. I will start my best lineup every week because kind of the competitive integrity of the league depends on everybody making a good faith effort to win. But I'm absolutely going to trade Alvin Kamara for a bunch of rookie picks and young players. I'm absolutely going to trade away Odell Beckham for, prospects. I'm going to absolutely trade away all of my present value and move it into the future. Because I'm sick of being the 6th best team and drafting in this range. I want to be really bad. And it worked out great. I got the number 2 pick. Pitts went number 1. I wound up with Jamar Chase. And then I won a title this year, actually, in no small part, thanks to Chase going absolutely bananas. Yes. Speaking of inconsistent players there, Chase is like the definition of inconsistency. But I think the main thing that we all need to keep in mind is we should be going to the Chip Kelly School of Dynasty, which is score fucking points. What's your plan?
Yep.
So that's basically it. I mean, you get a hold of a Jamar Chase, who cares if he's consistent?
I like the variance of his 55-point weeks.
Yeah,
that's the kind of variance that I like.
The thing too about inconsistent players is if you dump 8 of them together, the result is not inconsistent. If you've got 8 blow up players, it's not like they're all going to blow up on the same week. You'll have 1 week, 6 of them will put up duds and 2 of them will blow up. The next week, 6 of them will put up duds and a different 2 will blow up. Next week, 6 of them put up duds and a different 2 will blow up, right? And the end result is much, much, much more consistent than its component parts. The amount of consistency or inconsistency an individual player contributes to your overall squad is trivial.
Right, exactly. And, I think overall, I mean, to a certain extent, that consistency is a myth anyway. I mean, it's just, it's kind of based on short-term circumstances, and, consistency doesn't last long enough to actually be termed consistency, at least not in my book.
So interestingly, I actually project consistency for football guys for behind the scenes. It kind of feeds into our apps for like our DFS apps. For something like a GPP, you want a more inconsistent player. And even in our season long app, when it sees your starting lineup, it'll actually look at your opponent and say, wow, your opponent's way better than you are. You should load up on inconsistent players if you want a prayer here. And so I've done a lot of work on this over the years. And really the conclusion that I've come to is that 99.9% of people have no idea what they're looking for when they're talking about consistency. There's a lot of folk wisdom. The idea that it's predictable, it is barely. The amount of signal there is very, very small. Years of experience somewhat predicts consistency. The longer you've been in the league, the more consistent you tend to be. Something like yards per touch, yards per reception, guys like Deshaun Jackson are more inconsistent than Julian Edelman. But we're, like sum total, the difference between the most inconsistent and the most consistent players, maybe their standard deviation is about 15% larger than it otherwise would be. It's a small edge. On an individual level, for like an individual Dynasty GM, just the returns are not worth the amount of effort it would take to chase down that rabbit hole. It's probably better to just ignore it entirely. The nice thing about something like Football Guys is we have a lot of subscribers. And so something that's a very, very tiny edge multiplied over X subscribers all of a sudden becomes meaningful. But by and large, I tell people like I get paid project consistency, and I'm telling you, it doesn't matter. You can safely ignore it. It doesn't matter unless you're scaling above and beyond. If you're a high volume DFS player who's got $50,000 in play every week, sure, worry about it. If you're a diehard Dynasty player who's in 12 leagues, it doesn't matter. Just get the guys for the most points.
I think a good follow-up to that would be, what mistakes do you commonly see Dynasty touts pushing on Twitter? And a follow-up to that is, what mistakes do you see Dynasty owners consistently making?
The win now trades is a big one. I don't think it should be counterintuitively enough. I don't think it should be I don't think individual Dynasty GMs should be chasing wins. I don't think that's the way to win, is trying to win. I think the goal should be assemble the best roster possible, and the wins will happen. If you get a monster team, that team's going to win. If you're looking at how do I win this specific game, and you're trading value and making your team worse to try and win that game, it's probably a net negative move. I mentioned Fournette, and I don't think Fournette was necessarily a win now trade. In my mind, a win now trade is a trade that is probably negative value and expectation, but you're making it for the short-term help. I think it's totally fine to make trades that are positive value and expectation that also help you in the short term. Those are just good trades. But if you're trading away, if you're overpaying for a Cordero Patterson, then that's probably doing it once or twice isn't going to hurt you that much. But over time, just those little losses will add up and add up and add up, and you're going to be leaking talent off your roster. And especially if you're already a good team, you're going to be picking late in the rookie draft, and you're just going to be leaking more talent off your roster. And you just can't afford to do that a lot. You can't. I think most dynasty managers should be focusing on how do I build the best team possible. And if it wins, it wins. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. But if I'm doing my job right and I'm getting a good team, it's probably going to win a lot more than it loses.
All right. Sounds good. Andrew?
Dan, why don't you go to thanks for passing. I want to pass it right back to you. You had a question about the naive value formulas. Do you want to hit on that one before we go to some of the particular polarizing players?
Yeah, actually, let's hit on specifically. I know, Adam, you've got a naive value formulation for players after their first year, specifically wide receivers. So I'm gonna pop that up on the screen here just real quick. Hang on.
Don't you like that I put you under the gun, Dan?
Yeah, you can here we go. I got it. All right. So this is a little chart, I guess. Adam, tell us a little bit about how did you come up with these numbers? What is composite 3, and how does it relate to ongoing value?
Yeah, so composite 3 is just the third composite I tried. I liked it better than composite 1 and composite 2, and I haven't built composite 4 yet. So it's very much a work in progress. This kind of stems out of some people grind film. They look at a lot of prospects, and if you do that enough, you start to get intuitions for what things will translate, what things won't. I mean, there's a lot of just putting in reps. You watch a lot of film, and over time, you're going to get a lot more efficient at it, and you'll see the things that are meaningful a lot faster. I don't grind film. I don't pretend to grind film. I haven't watched a snap of college football in over a decade. I basically grind pages on Pro Football Reference. I look at a lot of, just for fun, I browse a lot of history I'm really into. And mostly it's just killing time and whatever, but it kind of serves as getting me reps. Like, I see a lot of statistics, and as a result, sometimes I come across something and I say, oh, hey, that actually looks really meaningful. And you kind of get this intuition for it. And a number of years back, actually around, 2013, I was looking at Percy Harvin because I am a huge Percy Harvin fan. And I noticed that he had some pretty monster yard per route run numbers, especially as a rookie. And I kind of filed that away, that this seems like a pretty interesting predictor. And over time, I've kind of looked at it, and I've realized over time that, yeah, actually rookie year yards per route run winds up being a really strong predictor. Like, you look at the guys who are over 2.0 yards per route run as a rookie, and obviously the obvious guys are there: Odell Beckham, Marcus Colston. You don't need a tricky statistic to tell you those guys are good. But there were some completely off the radar guys who are showing up on this list: Cooper Kupp, Hunter Renfrow, Doug Baldwin, guys who were. Tyreek Hill was, I think, a 5th round pick. Stephon Diggs was way up on the yards per route run list. Just 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round picks, undrafted players, guys who didn't even necessarily put up huge numbers as a rookie. Maybe they only had 400 or 500 yards. And so I started paying a lot of attention to that as a predictor. And I would, just jokingly tweet about it, oh, yeah, the scouts spent 100 hours grinding film on Hunter Renfrow and Stephon Diggs to find out they were good. I did it in 15 seconds just looking at a spreadsheet. And so that's kind of, I've been working to build that more into a model, other than just a threshold that over 2 is good. So I started looking at other factors. I looked at targets per route run. I looked at yards per game, targets per game, snaps per game. A big one I like is routes per team pass attempt. Basically, like if you're on the field for 100% of your team's passes or 30% of your team's passes. And so I got a bunch of these different factors that plausibly might be interesting. And then I normalized them all so that 100 is average. And then every standard deviation above or below that is plus or minus 15 points. And then I just kind of started sorting by it and like, does this look meaningful? Targets per route run, actually surprisingly not. You get a lot of like just really weird names at the top of that list. Donnie Avery, Devon Bess. Yards per route run, obviously very meaningful. And then I started kind of smashing them together in various ways, hence the term composite. And then I kind of test those composites against each other to see which kind of produces a better looking leaderboard. So right now, composite 3 is 2 parts, touchdown adjusted yards per route run, and then 1 part routes per team pass attempt. And that seems to work pretty well. It does a good job at identifying guys who are kind of off the radar, who you wouldn't really think of as being that great after their rookie year, who actually, went on to be pretty awesome. So that's what I'm playing with there. And then the tweet that you guys have, that's where this year's rookies all ranked in the new composite. So 100 is average, and then higher is better from there.
Okay. And you said about 15 is a standard deviation. So,
well, kind of.
Okay.
In the components, that's true. But when you start averaging the components, it kind of compresses it down. So an average of 130 is not 2 standard deviations. It might be more than 2 standard deviations. When I finally settle on a composite that I like, I'll probably rescale it again so that 100 is average and then 15 is a standard deviation. It's still very much a work in progress. It's just kind of a bigger is better sort of thing. And then actually, yeah, if you the tweet in question that has that chart, there's follow-up tweets that show where all of those rookies, like who historically that number has kind of scored around. So you can kind of see that like, oh yeah, this is the nobody ever misses, everybody is an absolute star range, or like, oh yeah, this is like a dead zone where other than Devontae Adams, everybody was just absolutely awful.
Okay, makes sense. And then your color coding there. Well, let me rephrase that. Where are your kind of your cutoffs as far as like the the really can't miss versus the pretty likely to succeed versus the kind of 50-50 shots and on down from there?
I don't really have cutoffs. It's all a pretty smooth scale. Okay. And I've looked at, are there any breakpoints, but it's pretty consistently bigger is better, all the way up and all the way down. My next project is going to be throwing in some fantasy values, some outcome data, and I can actually test and see, like guys in this range actually average this many points of fantasy value over the next 5 years and so on, and start to get some numbers assigned to it. Because right now everything is just very loosey-goosey, make a list, look at it, see if it sucks.
And what if I really want Josh Palmer to be a thing? Is his 83.9 just an absolute death sentence with the, as Toronto Dave calls it, the Harstad recipe for composite 3?
It's bad. If you want signs of hope, yes. The guy directly above Josh Palmer is Jordy Nelson. So that would be the sign of hope. But so right above, the 5 above him are Jordy Nelson, TJ Graham, Olabisi Johnson, Kelvin Harmon, and Harry Douglas. And then right above that, Jonathan Baldwin, Ted Ginn Jr. And then the guys right below him are Equanimous St. Brown, Paul Richardson Jr., Andre Roberts, Jacoby Myers, who might be a thing. I don't know. I mean, you're really grasping for hope at that point. Yeah. Adam Humphries, Nelson Aguilar, Darius Hayward-Bay. It's grim. It's not. I always say, I do a lot of historical modeling, and I say history is not destiny. You know, if Jordy Nelson had torn his ACL or torn his Achilles after year 2 and been done, that wouldn't make Josh Palmer less likely to hit, right? It would have made his comps worse, but Josh Palmer actually, I don't know if you know this, is actually a different player than Jordy Nelson. His knees are not Jordy Nelson's knees. You know, his ankles are not Jordy Nelson's ankles. If Nelson gets injured, that doesn't actually impact Josh Palmer, but it will impact his comps. So something like this is always risky. There's always outliers. You know, Jordy Nelson had no positive comps and he became great. Devontae Adams had no positive comps and he became great. Anything is possible. But like I said, it's all about pricing risk and reward better than the next guy. And I want absolutely nothing to do with that risk reward profile. If I could get somebody to pay me to take it off my hands, I'd be selling.
Yeah. Well, hope's a good thing. Maybe
shout out to Wheeler.
And no good thing ever dies. So.
And shout out to Wheeler in the chat. How about Terrace Marshall? Any hope there? I see he's significantly lower than Josh Palmer right now.
He is not literally the worst in the entire sample. He's not. He did beat out JJ Arcega-Whiteside.
Well, there you go.
So that would be the reason for optimism. He is better than JJ Arcega-Whiteside. But yeah, looking at the component parts, he is at least a standard deviation worse than average in routes per game, routes per team pass attempt, targets per game, yards per route run, targets per route run, touchdowns per route run. There's nothing positive in his profile.
Does he stay above JJ Arcega-Whiteside because he didn't have his mother holding an umbrella over him at training camp to keep the sun out of his face? Is that part of this model or no?
No.
Okay.
No.
Just check.
I have not actually. Maybe composite 5 or 6. I'll start adding mothers with umbrellas, but that's currently not an input. Also, draft position, not an input, which I'm very, very happy with. Because it's cool when something's telling you something meaningful and there's signal there without the draft position. Because if a model's only telling you that like highly drafted players are good, you don't need a model for that. I like a model that can look at somebody like a Stephon Diggs, who was picked 146th in the draft, you know, and say this guy's an absolute baller.
Yep, makes sense. Well, one thing we definitely want to get to is we want to talk about a couple players that have been kind of hot button issues, I guess, on Twitter. Where are you at, Adam, on like a CD Lamb? How are you valuing him right now? You know, maybe versus how the market is valuing him, or just how are you valuing him even independent of the market?
He was overpriced. Now he's kind of not. Now he's about right. I think I might still slightly prefer some of the other guys who are kind of in his range on keep, trade, cut right now. But he was weird. And I say that my process doesn't get me to a different place than anybody else's. It just gets me there a couple weeks faster. And if you're willing to pull a trigger pretty quickly, you can make a profit on like that 2-week lag. And my process was saying, I don't really get CD Lamb. You know, he's producing like T. Higgins. He's basically the same age as T. Higgins. He was drafted in the same range as T. Higgins. And yet CeeDee Lamb is the number 3 dynasty receiver and T. Higgins is like number 16. This doesn't make sense to me. It's like Eckler, Dalvin Cook, and Alvin Kamara. These guys should be very close. They're not very close. That probably means I want to sell the guys who are valued highest and buy the guys who are valued lowest. And I made the joke, I think a couple weeks ago on Twitter, that said, CeeDee Lamb has now continued his annual tradition of producing exactly like T. Higgins, but costing twice as much in Dynasty. And since then, there's been a huge market correction after the playoff game, which is kind of irrational because it's not like the playoff game showed us anything that he hadn't been showing us for weeks or months. But like I said, it's not that I'm getting to a different place. I just tend to be getting there a little bit faster. Now he's down to 7, I think. Yeah, it looks like 7 for me, which seems fine. He's young. He was pretty highly drafted. He was a pretty good prospect. He's not been terrible. Well, he's not been bad at all. He's been pretty solid. There was just nothing really in his profile that screamed top 3 yet. I didn't think that was a fair risk-reward balance on him. I would prefer Waddle because there is a lot in Waddle's profile that is screaming potential top 5. He was more productive in his first year than CeeDee Lamb was in either year, or more valuable in his first year than CeeDee Lamb was in either year. He was a higher draft pick, picked 6th overall versus I think like 17th for CeeDee Lamb. And the market, I think, still has Lamb over Waddle. But I won't be making joking tweets about Lamb at his price right now like I was a couple weeks ago when he was 3rd behind Chase and Jefferson. I don't want to be seen as a CeeDee Lamb hater because if he drops another few spots, I'll probably be buying him up. I just thought he was mispriced.
Okay. Makes sense.
How about the man of the moment? How about Gabe Davis?
I like Gabe Davis. I got him for free off waivers, which was nice. That was found money. Because he had, I calculated it a little bit ago. I think he had like 56 points in his first 10 weeks and 52 points in his last week. So kind of a contrast there. But yeah, he was like under 6 points a game over the first 10 weeks of the season. My philosophy is that larger sample sizes are always more predictive than smaller sample sizes. I don't think we should ignore this last game, but I think we should toss it in with every other game he's played this year, average it all together, and say that's probably the best representation of who he is as a wide receiver. It's a pretty good profile. He was decent in the rookie score, a little bit below average, but in a range that there were some credible hits there. It's easy to tell yourself a story of him returning value at some point. He's looked interesting. I don't want to put too much emphasis on narrative, but there are times when you look at him and you're like, this could be a guy who becomes a thing at some point. I like taking cheap gambles on guys like that, because if I'm wrong, when you're getting somebody off of waivers, the most likely outcome is they're useless. That's why they're on waivers. So it doesn't matter if you're right about a guy. If you're right about everybody on waivers, none of them are worth anything. You kind of want to get the guys who you're most likely to be wrong about. I've seen him going for a first recently. I would trade him for a first. I probably have him. I haven't done rankings, which is bad because it's hard to talk about player values when you haven't done rankings, because rankings really force you to confront, like, where would I really put him? When you're starting to compare the names head to head, there's a lot of valuation discipline there that it's easy to say that, I'd have him as wide receiver 36. And then you look at, well, I have 50 wide receivers who I would have in my top 36, and that doesn't really work out. With all that said, I would be okay with Gabe Davis in the 36 to 45 range, I think.
Okay.
As someone who probably dropped him to waivers more often than not this past year, the one thing I can't shake, and again, Toronto Dave in the chat mentioned it, is he just didn't get on the field. The fact that, like, what are the coaches telling us that we're not seeing? Now, obviously, he did great, in the playoff game. I I can't shake the what happened with the earning of the targets and earning of the playing time during the season. So I agree. If you can get a first round pick, absolutely, I'd be pulling that trigger. I'd probably be doing it for a second round pick too. I think JD and I think we're moving him for like thirds and fourths last year. Which like, who at the beginning of the season, you probably could have grabbed him back off waivers and then sold him again now. So maybe he's the gift that keeps on giving. But I agree. I think somewhere late first in any second round pick may also be of trigger pulling time.
And I'll add targets per route run, not especially meaningful. And he's pretty good there. He gets targets when he's on the field. But I do find that routes per team pass attempt is a pretty solid predictor. It's not as good as yards per route run, but adding it to yards per route run does create some predictive lift. So the fact that he couldn't get on the field, historically, that's been meaningful. And there are counterexamples. Tyree and Chris Godwin, I think, were both in the bottom 8 in my sample in terms of routes per team pass attempt as rookies, and they turned out okay. Sometimes there's a reason they're not getting on the field, sometimes whatever. But by and large, not getting on the field is a bad sign. But again, when they're on waivers, every profile has a ton of warts. You're looking for like some glimmer of hope. But when you're trading for firsts, you need a lot more than a glimmer of hope.
Yeah, and imagine if he off his rookie season, if he had done this last game in week 1 of the NFL season, you'd be trading the 101 in the next year's first round pick for him, because you'd think he's got all of the breakout only to see the rest of his game. So just flip that on its head a little bit, because I think that he was coming out with a relatively good profile from year 1.
Yeah, he was one of those guys I had a lot of hope for coming out of year 1. I mean, well, not a lot of hope, I guess I would say, but I had some hope for him.
Yep.
I felt like he was a reasonable bet, and then all of a sudden I see Sanders gets signed, and I'm like, Buffalo is telling me something here, and then but then I was like, well, but Sanders is, he's a veteran, experienced guy. Maybe they just want, a little bit more leadership to go with Diggs in the wide receiver room. But, when all of a sudden Sanders comes out of the gate earning targets, then that was the point where I was like, okay, Gabe, time to hit the road. Not the greatest move.
Hey, don't feel bad. I cut Rashad Penny and then had to bid like a huge chunk of my waiver budget like 3 weeks later to get him back, which my only consolation there is, well, first of all, that I did get him back. So I get to partake in those sweet value gains. But also I track my teams. I've got several visualizations for my teams. And one of the things I do is I track where I acquired every player. Like I got this guy in the draft 3 years ago, this guy on waivers 2 years ago. And Rashad Penny had been the longest tenured player on my entire team. And so I at least got to reset the counter so that every time I look at that, I don't have to, Rashad Penny's the longest tenured player on my team. Like that always feels bad. As sometimes I get to the point where I'm like, I want to cut you just so I don't have to look at you as just because you're such an albatross. That's what that means, is I can't get value for you in a trade. Yep. But like, you're not quite bad enough for me to just cut you. And sometimes I just want to move on. But I did get to reset the counter. So that was my one consolation.
Yeah. And the fab you can't take with you anyway. So, it's like Rashad you can take with you. The fab, gets left in the dust of 2021. So if you had it,
ours carries over, but it's one of those where
does it? Okay.
Yeah, they kind of, it's deep enough where nobody ever bids anything, and it's been rolling over for so long that now everybody just has like cartoon levels of fab where like it's become meaningless. Where you're like, yes, I'll bid like 3 years worth of fab on Rashad Penny because I haven't bid anything on anyone in like 8 years. So it's one of those funny situations.
Well, last wide receiver, just if we want to throw it out there, Amon-Ra St. Brown, rookie riser, but I think according to the composite 3, he was pretty high up there. So where are you seeing Amon-Ra St. Brown here this offseason going into next year?
He came on really strong at the end. By around week 12, I think, I ran the numbers, and he scored like a 93, which would put him down by 93 is not terrible, but it would, it's like where Rondale Moore is. It's pretty bad. And then he just went absolutely nuts. And I wasn't updating in real time, so people were asking me about him, and I'm like, he's pretty low, and I don't think this is moving the needle that much. But it really did. It bumped him up to basically him and Elijah Moore wound up tied in my model score, which feels about right. Elijah Moore kind of had a very similar season too, where he was just really low through the first half of the season, and then he had 4 or 5 scorching hot games. It's just his season ended in week 12, and Amon-Ra St. Brown's ended in week 18, but it's just the same season kind of shifted 6 weeks in the future. I would not have him personally quite as high as the model has him, just because he doesn't have the draft capital behind him. He didn't have the prospect profile of Elijah Moore. I do recognize that Detroit's wide receiver depth chart is unusual, that this is not normal circumstances, and that adds some uncertainty to the projection, although I don't want to put too much emphasis on that because everything is unusual circumstances. There's a bunch of other wide receivers on bad depth charts who didn't perform like that. There's wide receivers on bad depth charts who did perform really well, and it turned out they were actually good wide receivers. So I like Amon-Ra St. Brown more than I thought I would. I would still prefer Elijah Moore, but I hesitate to say anything about rookie picks because I haven't even looked at rookie picks for the upcoming year. Theoretically, he seems like he should be worth a first-round rookie pick, like a later-end first-round rookie pick. That seems like the type of price that once I dive into this rookie class, I will probably be willing to pay.
I like it.
Yeah, definitely. Makes sense. Well, quickly, because of course I'm terrible at running the podcast. We want to put in a quick plug for our sponsor, the FFPC. They have Dynasty Orphans just like crazy right now. You can go on there. You can find orphans from everything from $77 leagues to I don't know if they have any $5,000 leagues currently, orphans, but I know $2,500. So you can get a team in your price range. If you want to start out small, the 77s are great. And there's a lot of good rosters out there. And one of the nice things about the FFPC is the fact that they do have cut downs. So you can only retain 16 players, which, if you have a really good team, it kind of causes you to tear your hair out a little bit because you've got to give up on some players that you really don't want to, but it also makes it so that, even if you're getting a team that's pretty far down, you can turn it around in a hurry. I had one that, and this is a promo also for Dynasty Depot, who also does FFPC Dynasty Orphans. And I had a team last year that I bought for $50. It was a $250 Dynasty team. I made a few trades and I ended up selling it off for $250. So, you can, just sometimes all it needs is a little bit of creativity and imagination, and you can quickly turn a team around. That was one I turned around so fast I didn't even bother to hang on to it. It was just like, hey, I can make a quick profit right now and just move on. So, and then also make sure you're smashing the like button. If you like what's going on the GOAT District, make sure you let us know. Smashing the like button or subscribe. That only helps us out. So whether you're listening to us in podcast form or whether you're actually watching on YouTube, make sure you let us know. We definitely appreciate that, and we value everybody who's on here. We really appreciate the comments also. We've had Toronto Dave and Wheeler really hitting it hard in the comments today, but that's helpful to us as we're running the show as well.
And Dan, one last plug. If you want Theo and I's 205 in a Triflex league, one of the managers in our Triflex is selling the team. So you're more than welcome to go to the FFPC Dynasty site and draft Theonai's 205 from us. So what a great way to get back at Theo and I.
Absolutely, we welcome the competition. And Dan, there is one $5,000 orphan. I just checked.
All right,
and the team's not so bad. He's orphaning Cooper Kupp and Kyler Murray and a couple of decent assets right there.
Well, and I don't know if it's still there, but there was a couple days ago a $2,500 team that was available for $1. So
it sold today, Dan.
Oh,
so
did it?
It sold today. So there's our boy Pro Slackers. He's got two 2,500s and one 5,000 up. And that $1 was sitting in the middle of all of them, but that $1 is gone as of today. It wasn't me, but it was noticeable when it was gone.
Yeah, yep, I'm sure it was. All right, well, let's Adam, you've been like super helpful with your time and everything else. We really appreciate you hanging out with us for this long. But on the way out, why don't you give us a couple of your sickest values and dynasties? We're heading into 2022. Is there anybody that you're really out there trying to acquire, that you're willing to actually talk about in public?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like I say this most of the year, but I'm pretty soft on values right now. I don't really have a great feel. I mean, unless I'm actively buying and selling, I don't really have a great feel for what people are going for. I was checking Keep Trade Cut again. One thing is Waddle for a long time I felt people were like way undervalued on, just because, again, top 10 draft pick, producing really well as a rookie. Historically, that profile is a very, very valuable one. I feel like people have kind of caught up to Waddle. He's wide receiver 8 now. He's right around CeeDee Lamb. This feels about the right range. I might have him a tiny bit higher, but I'm not going to quibble too much over that. But Devontae Smith actually scored even a hair better in composite 3, which I'll have to come up with a name at some point once I'm done iterating composites. He scored a hair better. I'd still prefer Waddle to Smith, regardless of what the model says. The model's not, it's not the boss of me. It's a data point to inform my decision making. But right now, Smith is going right next to Elijah Moore, and I think he should probably be closer to Waddle than Elijah Moore. So he seems like a good buy. And then other than that, I always like cheap, talented quarterbacks. I think people underrate how important talent is. And you'll see when you get to like the 3rd or the 4th rounds, you'll see like mediocre running backs and wide receivers going around like all pro quarterbacks. And if you look back like 8 years from now, who's going to be regretting their 4th round pick? Typically, it's not the guy who drafted the all pro quarterback. So depending on what everybody costs at any given moment, I'm always happy to buy Patrick Mahomes in the 2nd round of startups. I'm always happy to buy whoever's cheapest of Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, Kyler Murray, those kind of guys. If I can get like a huge discount on maybe like a Dak Prescott, I do love, and I want to say it's like a weakness because I tend to accumulate too many of on my 2 dynasty squads right now, my quarterback depth chart is one of them has Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, and Dak Prescott. And the other one is Murray and Herbert. And these are 1 quarterback leagues. So it feels like wasteful to have that kind of value on the bench. But the nice thing about quarterbacks is they hold the value too. It's not like any of those guys, barring unforeseen circumstances, is going to be losing any value in the short run. So I do I tend to be an advocate for getting some of those talented singlet positions on the cheap. Mark Andrews, I think, is kind of the same, where there seems to be a little bit of a discount on him. Just structurally, yeah. I like that.
I love the Devonta Smith call. I think he's one I was trying to look into as well.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be a sense that he had a disappointing rookie year. Like, people seem to be relatively impressed with his rookie year. It just doesn't seem like his price is reflecting it, and I don't really get that too much.
Yeah, he got just missed on several deep shots, penalties, took away a couple of long gains by him. It was just kind of like, I thought he was a guy who got exceedingly unlucky this year as far as, it could have been a much huger year for him. And I know you can kind of probably look at a lot of wide receivers and say that, but not everybody. So I think there is something to, just kind of keeping that context in mind that, Devonta could have had a much better year. So.
Well, and I mean, even ignoring could have, like he averaged more yards per route run than Jalen Waddle, who we all agree had a great year.
Right.
I don't think he even needs to make excuses. I think he had a very strong year in his own right. He was pretty highly drafted. I don't know. It's weird. And usually when I look at values and I don't understand them, usually that just means I'm a little bit ahead and the value winds up catching up. I wouldn't be surprised to see Smith rise in the next couple months. And if that's the case, that's always nice because then you've got the option. You can just sell him right back and just lock in those profits immediately.
Yeah. Makes sense. All right. Well, Adam, we appreciate your time. Thank you for hanging out with us tonight. It was super helpful for me, I know, and definitely everybody in the chat was digging it as well. So appreciate everything that you brought to the GOAT District tonight. Anything that you want to say on your way out? Anything you want to plug? Anything like that? The floor is yours.
Yeah, I always write at Football Guys, footballguys.com. I have a blog that I keep links to everything I write, which a lot of it's strategy stuff, so it tends to age pretty well. And you can find the link to my blog in my Twitter profile at Adam Harstad.
All right, sounds good.
Adam,
Andrew?
thank you so much. This is great. I really appreciate it. Thanks for putting up with my nonsense as usual. I loved it, and I agree again with Toronto Dave. Like this is a great rewatch and a lot of good notes, and obviously, as you said, the link to the blog will be helpful for all the strategy articles. So, looking forward to diving in some more as we, especially as I do some prep for the 2022 rookie drafts and rookie or dynasty season.
All right, sounds good. So, and Andrew, you got some things coming up that you're looking at for like best ball and all that as well. You want to?
Oh yeah, kicked off the best ball. I think really looking to ramp up guests, collaborations, all things redraft and high stakes. So doing a little bit more NFFC as long as I can figure out the website, which I know Theo may need some help there, but. Doing a lot of prep, getting some guest lists together, obviously in connection with the main GOAT District show as well. So to the extent that you guys have ideas or collaboration thoughts, send them JD's way, send them Dan's way, send them Theo's way, my way. We'll get you hooked up. We'll get the guests that you want to see. We already have a killer guest list and just looking to keep improving on it. So looking forward to it this year.
Awesome. Theo, what you got?
No, this was awesome. I really appreciate having come on. This is the kind of guest that we've been trying to get on. It makes us better players. It makes our listeners better players. And just enjoy the playoffs this weekend. It's been an awesome ride this season, and I think we were really rewarded with some amazing football last weekend, and hopefully it continues this weekend. And we're looking to have a bunch of great guests on in February. Dan and I are in two best balls right now. I'm sure we're gonna jump into some of the results we've had from that. We look forward to more great shows, and thanks again to Adam.
Anytime. Happy to come on.
Yep. Without a doubt. Yeah. So again, thanks, Adam. Appreciate it. I mean, this was absolutely the hour and a half flew by for me. So appreciate you hanging with us this long. And we'd definitely love to have you on again sometime in the future if you're up for it. So I'm going to ask that in public and just put you on the hook, right?
No, hey, hit me up. I'll answer in public if any of your listeners want to have me on anytime. I'm always, available and happy to help. And if anybody needs anything, just let me know.
There you go. Perfect.
Awesome.
All right, guys. Thanks a lot to our listeners for listening, and we will catch you all next week.
district, you know the Pope listens. Dynasty, our religion, for the blokes missing. On all of these trades, on all of these plays, on all of these grades. By the end of the day, y'all getting played. So, what you gonna do next? Try to fill up that flex? Send the homie a text? That trash offers the best? You try to make it complex, then they text you back. Now all of a sudden they don't make any sense. Broaden your horizons, boy. Dynasty's not for the Simons, boy. These trades not for consignment, boy. Respect your opponent, y'all some piranhas, boy. This my advice from me to you. Open up your cute little podcast queue. Search up GOAT District, my dude. Pop it in your ear, man. Y'all know what to do. It's the... And I always be traded. And I always be traded. And I always be trading. Y'all try to betray them, but first you gotta bait them. Fish.